Hello, Captain's Log, September the 7th, 2021. I'm back after a little bit of a break, and I immediately want to get back into our Christian discussions. Today we are going to be talking about a fictional character Christian created, that character being Rosechu. Now, I know some people call her Rosechu, mostly D-Stex fans. I've also said Rosechu. I don't really care between the two names. Christian named her Rosechu. That's the way that he said it. Some people say it one way, some people say it another way. I choose to use both interchangeably. So if you're gonna get mad at that, oh well. Sometimes I'll call her Rosechu, sometimes I'll call her Rosechu. For today's discussion, we're gonna have to go all the way back to the beginning of Christian trolling. When people originally wanted to fuck with Chris, one of the things that they would tell Chris is that his character Rosechu was a guy. Now, for most people, they would shrug this off and be like, oh well, some weirdos think that my character's a dude, or they're just saying that to get me mad. But Christian chose instead to defend Rosechu. And if you look at his logic, it makes perfect sense. If you go all the way back to Sonichu's creation, you would see that Christian put himself into Sonichu. Later it would be literally, but at the beginning it was figuratively. But Sonichu was a self-insert. If we read the comic that Christian made for his friend Sarah, called Christian and Sarah's Life Shares, we would see that Christian literally put himself into the role of Sonichu. Sonichu represented him in the story, and Rosechu represented Sarah, someone who he was trying to get with at the time and thought was his soulmate. So that would mean that Rosechu is his perfect ideal woman, just like Sonichu is his perfect ideal self. Now, I know some people would be like, but Dylan, later on, Christian would make his own Sonichu form, and to that I would have to say, Christian has so many self-inserts, Sonichu definitely is one of them. He has the Cherokee Chan pony as well. He has the other pony OC. He has multiple versions of fictional Chris living in Quickville. Christian has more than one self-insert, and Sonichu definitely was one of them. But hopefully now, with that out of the way, you guys understand why Christian was so defensive over Rosechu. Because when you insult Rosechu, you don't just insult Rosechu. You insult his future wife, and you insult his own sexuality. So Christian, when defending Rosechu's sexuality, was really just defending himself. And that's where it comes from. It comes from a place of ego. Christian saw it as a slight at him, that people were calling him gay, not calling Sonichu gay. Now, the discussion of Rosechu being a man or not wouldn't be taken seriously till years later. Originally, it was just people on ED and people on other places making art of Rosechu with a pickle. Sometimes literally a pickle, and sometimes a dick. So, just know, this was very serious trolling. But this art would really disturb Christian, and it would make him want to draw sex scenes between Rosechu and Sonichu in the comic to prove that they are straight. It would have him show Rosechu's nudes a lot in the comic, in an attempt to prove to people that she doesn't have a dick. Because if he doesn't draw her with a dick, she's never had a dick. But this conversation would be taken seriously years later, when the Pokemon video games introduced genders into the Pokemon world. Now, there's always been gendered Pokemon, but it's very different now than it was when Christian made Rosechu. The tip of a Raichu's tail can indicate if it's a male or female, and Christian just so happened to draw Rosechu's tail like a male. Now, when Christian made Rosechu, this wasn't a thing, and all he had to do was say, well, that wasn't a thing. I didn't understand that would become a thing. I'll fix her tail, one little retcon, boom, and it's done. Now, some people would be like, Christian would never retcon Sonichu. Christian wouldn't redraw all the pages with the Rosechu's tail. Christian has retconned the comic multiple times, and went back and redrew segments without any problem. Christian decided that Eggman never appeared in one of his comics, so he went back and drew out Eggman and created an entirely new character to replace him. Fixing a tail would not be that big of a deal. Fixing a tail would be better than all the other shit that he did to prove that Rosechu was a woman. But for Christian, he was fully believing that Rosechu was a woman, and that the tail didn't matter. He didn't even want to address the tail thing. He didn't even want to make an excuse for the tail thing. But the tail thing would continue. Eventually, there would be a fan comic made called Rosechu's Story. Rosechu's Story is a fan comic made by someone on Kiwi Farms. In this comic, Rosechu would go on and explain that when they were a Raichu, they were male, but when they evolved, they turned female. And this just happens with some Pokemon. Now, apparently, this is an actual fact. I don't know enough about Pokemon to really educate you on how it works, but just know when some Pokemon evolve, they can actually switch their genders. So, it's not completely new in the world of Pokemon that this could happen. And it was through this explanation that Christian finally started to call Rosechu a man. And Christian can be seen all the way back when this comic released, starting to accept that at one point Rosechu might have been a man. But he accepts that Rosechu is a female now, so it doesn't matter. But this is the beginnings of Christian accepting that Rosechu is trans. Now, shortly after this, the Idea Guys would be introduced. The Idea Guys were a bunch of trolls who wanted to mess with Christian by feeding into his delusions and in torturing his fictional world. The Idea Guys convinced Christian that Rosechu was 100% trans. Not that they evolved and then lost their genitalia, not that the tail was a mistake or anything. They convinced Chris that Rosechu was 100% a male character who got a sex change operation to become female. So, Christian spent all these years fighting against the trolls. The whole trolling stuff began to defend the honor of Rosechu. Christian made comics where Rosechu and Sonichu had sex to prove that Rosechu was a woman. Christian made them have kids to prove that Rosechu was a woman. This was an important plot point in Sonichu and in Christian's life. And because some LARPing loser called the Idea Guy told him that Rosechu was a man, he just accepted it as fact. He didn't argue about it. He didn't get mad about it. He cried about it, but he accepted it as a fact, proving that Christian really doesn't have any stand in his own logic. Christian will bend to anyone's demands if they're willing to get onto the same level as him and LARP with him. Rosechu's sexuality never mattered. Rosechu's gender never mattered. Christian only defended it because it was a slight at himself. The second that Christian started thinking that he was trans, and the second that Christian was told that Rosechu was trans again in the modern day, it doesn't matter what his logic 10 years ago was. It doesn't matter how hard he fought for it. He just accepted that Rosechu was trans. And I think that this is one of the biggest signs that Christian's mind has deteriorated, even more than where it was at over 10 years ago. Christian used to be very defensive over his characters, but now he just lets anyone say anything about them, and then he makes it canon. So, Rosechu went from being a character that was 100% a woman, to being a character with a male's tail, to being a character who was a male and then evolved into a female, to being a character who was born male, had genitalia, and then got a magical sex change operation to turn into a female. You can see how slowly, even though Christian never wanted it, even though Christian fought so hard to defend her, the trolls won in the end. Rosechu was a man, and she had a pickle. It didn't matter how hard he tried to fight it. 10 years later, the trolls finally got their way, and Rosechu did play with her pickle. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this discussion. If you guys learned something new today, hit that like button. If you really like this video, then share it around to your friends. I'm going to be making more videos like this soon, so stick around if you want to hear me talk more about Sonichu and Christian. Thank you guys for watching, and bye.